Hey guys! Tonight we begin with a little bedtime stroll through some of the most unlucky brides in European history. You know, the ones who thought they were marrying into power, jewels, and castles, but instead found themselves trapped in dynastic soap operas with a side order of plague, betrayal, or just sheer bad luck. So, dim the lights, fluff your pillow, and settle in, because these ladies didn't get happy endings, but at least you'll get a relaxing story out of it. Let's glide first to the late 15th century, Spain, where our first unlucky bride was born. Her name was Katherine of Aragon. Yes, that Catherine, the one who would eventually become Henry VIII's first wife. You might think, oh, Queen of England, not too shabby. Except her entire life was basically a string of disappointments wrapped in rosary beads. Catherine was born in 1485, the youngest daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. You know, the monarchs who bankrolled Columbus's little trip across the ocean. She was raised in a glittering, pious court, and, like all royal daughters, she was treated as a piece in the giant chess game of European alliances. Her parents decided she'd marry Arthur, Prince of Wales. Not Henry, Arthur. Now, Arthur, poor kid, was supposed to be the next king of England. He was delicate, pale, and probably had about as much energy as a Victorian fainting couch. But that didn't matter. Dynastic contracts were signed, Catherine shipped off to England, and she and Arthur got married in 1501. They were both 15, which, even by Tudor standards, was not ideal. Here's where the curse vibes begin. Just a few months after their wedding, Arthur suddenly died. Some say tuberculosis, some say sweating sickness. Either way, Catherine was now a widow at 16, stranded in cold, rainy England, stuck between two royal families who were already bickering about dowries.
Now, most brides would have just gone home, but Catherine didn't. Instead, she stayed in limbo for 7 years. 7! Imagine being a teenager, widowed, broke, and living under the roof of your in-laws who weren't even sure they wanted you around. Henry VIII, Arthur's dad, basically kept her on a budget so tight she had to sell her own jewelry to buy food. Katherine of Aragon, first in line for the unluckiest bride crown. Eventually, of course, she married Arthur's younger brother, Henry VIII. At first, Henry actually liked her. He even wrote love letters. But fast forward a few decades, and she's middle-aged, struggling to produce a surviving male heir, and Henry's busy writing passive-aggressive letters to the Pope demanding an annulment. Catherine was tossed aside for Anne Boleyn, and her marriage ended with exile, humiliation, and death in lonely isolation. So yeah, not exactly a fairy tale wedding, more like a cursed one. But let's drift to another unlucky bride. Anne of Cleves. She deserves a mention, if only because her curse was, honestly, just bad PR. Anne was the daughter of a German duke. In 1539, Henry VIII, now middle-aged, obese, and plagued with gout, needed a new wife. His advisors suggested Anne. Henry, being Henry, wanted to know what she looked like, so he sent Hans Holbein, the famous painter, to make a portrait. Holbein, being very diplomatic, painted her in the most flattering light possible. The result? A miniature that made Anne look delicate, composed, and not at all terrifying. When Henry saw the portrait, he thought, yes, perfect, send her over. But when Anne arrived in England, Henry took one look at her in person and, according to legend, muttered something like, "I like her not," which in Tudor code basically meant, "Oh dear, I've been catfished." The wedding went ahead anyway, because politics, but Henry claimed he couldn't consummate it. He complained she smelled, that she wasn't as pretty as her picture, and that he felt deceived. Anne, bless her, rolled with it. The marriage was annulled after just 6 months. Now here's the ironic part. Out of all Henry's wives, Anne of Cleves actually had the best ending. She got to live in England, unmarried, with a generous allowance, and was nicknamed the king's beloved sister. Still, imagine being remembered forever as the ugly wife. Not cursed in the tragic sense, but cursed in reputation. Floating further along, let's visit France and meet poor Marie Antoinette. She's almost too obvious to include, but her bridal story fits the theme too well. Mary was married off at just 14 to Louis Auguste, the awkward heir to the French throne. Their marriage was basically a Europe-wide spectacle. Think of it as the royal version of a Netflix original series. Everyone tuned in, gossip was rampant, and expectations were high sky. But behind the scenes, it was a disaster. Louis Auguste was shy, clumsy, and probably suffering from some medical condition that made intimacy difficult. For 7 years, their marriage wasn't consummated. 7 years! Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette was criticized constantly for failing to produce an heir. She spent her time shopping, gambling, and throwing elaborate parties to distract herself from the world's most awkward marriage. Eventually, yes, they figured things out and had children. But by then, the gossip had already painted her as frivolous, selfish, and cursed. When the French Revolution erupted, her Austrian bride status became a target. The once celebrated teenage bride ended her life on the guillotine. Not quite the diamond-drenched fairy tale Versailles had promised. Let's float north for a moment, to Denmark, where Princess Caroline Matilda of Great Britain became Queen Consort of Denmark at just 15. Sounds glamorous, right? Except her husband was Christian VII. Now, Christian was unique. He suffered from severe mental illness, probably schizophrenia. He was known for self-harm, erratic behavior, and neglect of his duties. Caroline Matilda was horrified. Their marriage was cold and dysfunctional from the start. But then, in a twist, she struck up an affair with her husband's physician, Johann Struensee. The two became deeply involved, and Struensee even took over much of Denmark's government. For a brief moment, Caroline Matilda thought she'd turned her cursed marriage into a partnership that worked. Except, of course, the court found out. Struensee was arrested and executed. Caroline Matilda was exiled, separated from her children, and died of scarlet fever at just 23. Another bride who thought she was marrying into stability and instead got chaos, scandal, and tragedy. Now, drifting back to England again, let's not forget poor Anne Boleyn. Technically, she wasn't cursed on her wedding day, but she became cursed the second she married Henry VIII. Anne was clever, ambitious, and determined. She managed to keep Henry dangling for years, refusing to sleep with him until he promised marriage, which, given Henry's track record, was like negotiating with a bear over honey. Eventually, she won. She married Henry in 1533 and was crowned queen. But the marriage quickly soured. Henry grew impatient when she failed to produce a surviving son. She gave him a daughter, Elizabeth, but suffered miscarriages after. Soon, rumors swirled. Anne was accused of witchcraft, adultery, even incest. None of it was true, of course. But truth didn't matter. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by sword on trumped-up charges. Her bridal crown turned into a scaffold block within just 3 years. So, if you're keeping track, that's already a cursed sorority of royal brides. Katherine of Aragon, Anne of Cleves, Marie Antoinette, Caroline Matilda, Anne Boleyn. And sadly, the list just keeps going. But let's pause here before drifting into more dynastic disasters, because honestly, there are so many doomed brides in royal history, we could fill entire bedtime playlists with their stories. And tonight, we're just getting started. So close your eyes, let the drama of centuries past fade into the background, and remember, not every princess lived happily ever after.